Welcome to the Vault of Tales, a treasure trove of science fiction stories. Today, we delve into a tale of survival, mystery, and an impossible connection. Ethan Turner, a soldier who barely escaped death, learns a shocking truth. Sia Vance, a genetically engineered hybrid, has disappeared without a trace. But months later, a single message changes everything. Sia is alive, and with her, a secret neither of them thought possible. Ethan has a child, one that could reshape the fate of entire civilizations. Let's get started. Harrova Prime, the black gem of the galaxy, where neon lights blaze but never bright enough to chase away the lurking shadows. A neutral planet, yet it is precisely this neutrality that has turned it into one of the largest underground trade hubs in the universe. Smugglers, spies, and interstellar diplomats all walk the same streets, separated only by a breath. Solvadine Market, a labyrinth of 1,000 stalls, filled with the clamor of vendors shouting over one another, their voices interwoven with the exotic aromas of spices from 100 different civilizations. A Gravani merchant, his metallic-hued skin glinting under the artificial lights, displays glowing gemstones harvested from distant worlds. Nearby, a group of Drellin traders demonstrate a biomaterial capable of shifting its form at will. Among the bustling crowd, no one pays attention to anyone, until a screen cuts through the air. A Gravani child, no older than 8, dirt-smudged but with the signature silver eyes that gleam even in the dim glow of the market, is yanked into the shadows by a faceless figure. In the span of a heartbeat, the stranger drags the child into a narrow alleyway, vanishing as if they had never existed. A Gravani woman's wail shatters the marketplace's restless hum. For a brief moment, the crowd hesitates, then moves on. On Harrova Prime, a disappearance is nothing unusual, just another ghost swallowed by the planet's endless night. Ethan Cole sat in the Velkin Den, a dingy bar tucked away in Harrova Prime's slums. Before him, a small hollow device flickered to life. Replaying a report, text hovered in the air, glowing faintly. Report number 1243 LMG. Case: missing child. Subject: Gravani, 7 years old. Location: Solvadine Market. Status: no clear witnesses. Ethan swiped through the screen, bringing up a list of prior cases. 24 children, of all races, but with one undeniable pattern: they were all hybrids, the offspring of 2 different species. A strange coincidence, or a carefully orchestrated operation? He powered down the device, taking a slow sip of Rixel, the signature, throat-burning liquor of Harrova Prime, before rising from his seat. A cold prickle crawled up his spine, a sensation he had learned to trust over years of experience. Adjusting his coat, he stepped out into the night. The slums of Harrova Prime were a place where even artificial light struggled to reach. Narrow alleys, littered with illicit surveillance nodes, tech waste, and those who lived outside the law. Ethan knelt, scanning the ground, a faint drag mark, a sign that someone had been pulled away. Fast, no struggle, no spent cartridges, no bloodstains, a clean abduction. Professionals, a noise. Ethan turned, hand darting toward the plasma pistol at his hip. Too late. A force slammed into his chest, launching him backward into a rusted metal wall. A figure emerged from the darkness, eyes glowing red in the void. Cop, the voice was low, distorted, laced with an artificial rasp. Ethan didn't answer. He leveled his pistol and fired. The plasma bolt barely cleared the barrel before an invisible field absorbed in midair. Shit, he muttered, rolling aside just as a boot crashed down where he had been standing. More figures stepped out of the shadows. 3 of them, their movements too precise, too synchronized, not mere mercenaries, assassins. Ethan ignored the ache in his ribs. Focusing, he had 2 seconds to decide. He wasn't about to die tonight. With a flick of his wrist, he activated the flash emitter on his forearm. A blinding white explosion of light filled the alley, searing through the darkness. Ethan lunged. His fist drove into the nearest attacker's throat, sending the man crumpling to the ground. Gasping for air, pivoting, He slammed the butt of his pistol into another's temple. The third came at him fast. Ethan barely dodged in time. Before he could strike again, a blade of pure energy pressed against his throat. Impressive, the masked one chuckled, but this is where you take a nap. A crushing blow struck the back of his head. Darkness swallowed him whole. A sharp pain lanced through the back of Ethan's head as consciousness slowly returned. The cold touch of the metal floor seeped through his coat, his breathing heavy and uneven. He was alive. That was the first thing he noticed. The second, he was no longer in the slums. His eyelids fluttered open, and a flickering neon sign outside cast intermittent light against a rusted metal wall. A warehouse, abandoned, judging by the stale scent of burnt circuitry and machine oil hanging thick in the air. Ethan groaned and lifted his head. His wrists were free, no restraints. A mistake on his captor's part? Unlikely. You came to quicker than I expected. The voice, cool and detached, came from above. He blinked away the haze clouding his vision and looked up. A woman stood before him, arms crossed, clad in a form-fitting tactical suit, sleek, dark, built for movement. Her silver eyes glowed faintly in the dim light. Gravani. Ethan winced as he pushed himself up. Who the hell are you? Sia Vance, she answered curtly, independent investigator for the Gravani coalition. He narrowed his gaze, still shaking off the lingering fog. I take it you're not one of the bastards who knocked me out? No, she tilted her head slightly, studying him, but if I had been, you wouldn't be conscious yet. Ethan let out a dry chuckle. Charming. She didn't react. I've been tracking this case long before you set foot on Harrova Prime. Ethan rolled his shoulders, testing his range of movement. His muscles ached, but nothing felt broken. Then I suppose you know who just gifted me a concussion? Sia glanced around, then stepped closer, her voice dropping to a murmur. A high-tier mercenary squad. Someone hired them to silence anyone who digs too deep. And you've been digging. Ethan shrugged, just doing my job. Her silver eyes hardened. Your job? A Gravani child was abducted. This is my concern, not yours. Ethan folded his arms, his expression sharp. This isn't an isolated case. Over the past 2 months, 24 children from different species have vanished without a trace. His voice was measured, deliberate. Do you really think I'd walk away just because this time the victim happens to be one of yours? Sia held his gaze, scanning his face as if trying to see beyond his words. A moment passed before she exhaled, her posture shifting slightly. I've read about you, Ethan Cole. Your reputation says you don't quit. I'll take that as a compliment. She tilted her head. Don't. Ethan arched a brow. Trust issues. Fantastic, because I don't trust you either. The air between them was taut, an invisible battle of wills. Their eyes locked, two forces unwilling to back down. Then, before either could speak again, a sound sliced through the quiet. A metallic scrape, unnatural, like something clawing its way across the warehouse's outer wall. Ethan's fingers twitched toward his holstered plasma pistol as Sia spun toward the noise, her silver eyes flashing with something cold and lethal. They found us. The warehouse door shuddered violently. Sparks flared along the edges as an external override began to disengage the locking mechanisms. Back up, Sia ordered, drawing a razor-thin energy blade from her belt. Ethan didn't need to be told twice. He leveled his gun at the door, bracing for whatever was coming. The lock gave way, the doors burst open, and the darkness flooded in. Darkness flooded into the warehouse like a cold, suffocating tide. Ethan tightened his grip on the plasma pistol, every muscle tensed as he tracked the shifting shadows moving toward them. A heartbeat later, a burst of blue energy flared. Sia's blade cut clean through one of their attackers. Ethan seized the moment, pulling the trigger. His plasma shot burned through the dark like a crimson lightning bolt. The mercenaries had arrived. The fight erupted in a blur of motion and death. Sia moved like a phantom, her silver eyes glowing in the dim light, an advantage of her enhanced Gravani vision. Ethan, though lacking her supernatural reflexes, made up for it with deadly precision. He dropped 2 assailants before another came at him from behind. Behind you. Sia's warning came an instant before her energy blade slashed through the mercenary's throat. A spray of blood hit the floor. Vanishing into the shadows, Ethan turned in time to see Sia pulling her blade free. Her expression cold, detached. "We need to move," she said, her breath steady despite the battle. Ethan didn't argue. They slipped through the bodies, exiting the warehouse before reinforcements could arrive. They needed answers. 3 hours later, Harrova Prime's abandoned dockyards, Ethan stood before a rusted metal door, its corroded surface marked by the passage of time. Beside him, Sia lowered a biometric scanner. "This is where they're keeping the children?" Ethan asked, his voice grim. Sia nodded. "An anonymous source sent me these coordinates. I don't know who's behind it, but it seems we're not the only ones looking for the truth." Ethan narrowed his eyes. An unknown informant? That was never a good sign. But they were short on leads. "Gear up," he muttered, checking his plasma pistol. "Something tells me they won't be rolling out a welcome mat." The door slid open with a groan, releasing a gust of cold, sterile air. The scent of metal and chemicals clung to the corridor beyond. They stepped inside, the long hallway dimly illuminated by flickering blue overhead lights. The silence was unnatural, as if the place had been abandoned for years. Then they heard it. A cry, soft, weak, echoing through the corridor. Ethan and Sia moved faster. They reached another door, pushing through to find a vast chamber lined with containment pods, each one housing a child. Rows upon rows of them, huddled in sterile glass enclosures. Some were asleep, others trembled, their tiny faces etched with fear. Ethan clenched his fists. What the hell did they do to these kids? Sia approached one of the pods, her expression darkening. She placed a hand on the cold glass, silver eyes scanning the glowing display beside it. Then, she froze. Ethan immediately noticed the shift in her demeanor. "What is it?" She didn't answer right away. A single word escaped her lips in Gravani, a whisper of disbelief. Ethan stepped closer. "Sia?" She turned to him, her normally composed face betraying a flicker of shock. Without a word, she pointed to the data readout. Ethan followed her gaze, then his breath caught in his throat. Subject designation, K-27. Species, Gravani. Biological status, stable. Genetic composition, 52% Gravani, 48% human. Ethan stared. "That's not possible." Sia's voice was barely a whisper. "It shouldn't be. Gravani and humans could not reproduce. Their genetic structures were fundamentally incompatible. Scientific fact. Undisputed for centuries. And yet, here was a child that defied all logic." Ethan swallowed hard, unease crawling up his spine. "Looks like we just uncovered a secret someone really didn't want us to find." Sia remained frozen, eyes locked on the pod. The cold light reflected off her irises. But beneath the icy surface, a storm was brewing. The air inside the laboratory was thick, stale, and cold, as if it had trapped too many secrets within its walls. Ethan stared at the screen, the impossible data glaring back at him. A child, K-27, born of both Gravani and human DNA. Beside him, Sia stood frozen, her gaze locked on the glass incubator. But it wasn't shock that held her still. It was something deeper, something Ethan couldn't quite decipher. "We can't stay here," she said suddenly, her voice dry. "If they come back." Ethan nodded. They didn't have time for questions, not yet. He pulled the data storage module from the control panel, copying every last file on the children, especially K-27. "Let's get out of here before this gets any worse." 12 hours later, a bar in Harrova Prime's underbelly. The air was thick with the scent of strong liquor and stale smoke. Ethan sat in the darkest corner, idly stirring his whiskey while keeping a watchful eye on the room. Across from him sat Rex Vorn, a black market information broker, wearing his usual smirk, a mixture of amusement and calculation. "This is big, Cole," Rex murmured, leaning back in his seat. "You're poking around in places even people like me wouldn't dare." Ethan tightened his grip around his glass. "I don't care who they are. I just want to know who's behind the kidnappings." Rex sighed, stroking his unkempt beard before pulling out a hollow pad. Data streamed across the screen, names, numbers, images, but one thing stood out. A symbol, a shadowy figure with glowing red eyes. A chill ran down Ethan's spine. Shade, Rex muttered, a group that operates in the dark, collecting and controlling things no one else should know about. Ethan exhaled slowly, his eyes fixed on the emblem. So they're responsible for the disappearances? Rex smirked. Not just that, they control the truth. Ethan didn't like the way he said that. But before he could press further, an explosion shattered the front entrance. The bar doors blew apart, black-clad figures poured in. They had found him, elsewhere, in a hidden room on Harrova Prime. Sia Vance sat alone, silver eyes reflecting the cold glow of the monitor before her. DNA sequences scrolled across the screen, analyzed, compared, verified. She had taken a sample. Her own, she had to know. And then, the results appeared. Her breath caught. Genetic composition, 73% Gravani, 27% human. Her body went rigid. No, she had always believed she was pureblood. She had always known, without a doubt, that Gravani and humans were biologically incompatible. That was a fact, scientifically proven for centuries. And yet, the truth was now staring her in the face. A silent tremor rippled through her mind. If this was real, then what was she? And more importantly, who had created her? Her fingers clenched into fists, her breath steadying. This wasn't just another case anymore. This was about her, and she needed to find Ethan. She needed answers. Back at the bar, Ethan dove behind an overturned table as plasma bolts seared through the air. The bar erupted into chaos. Red streaks of light cut through the smoky haze, shattering bottles and charring wood. The attackers moved with brutal precision, black armor, featureless masks, deadly efficiency. Shade, Ethan fired back, but they were fast, too fast. A soldier closed in, striking him hard. A boot to the ribs sent him crashing against the liquor shelves. Glass shattered, shards biting into his skin. Rex was gone. Either he had slipped away, or he was dead. Ethan struggled to his feet, but a cold barrel pressed against his temple. "Don't fight it, Cole," a masked voice murmured. "You already know too much." His pulse pounded. He had seconds, maybe less. And then, the bar window exploded, a blur of motion. A blade flashed. Sia, she landed like a lightning strike. Energy dagger slicing clean through the nearest attacker's armor. A sharp twist. Blood sprayed as the body hit the ground. Ethan didn't waste the opening. He slammed into the soldier restraining him, wresting the gun free and firing 2 rapid shots. 2 more fell. Less than 10 seconds. The fight was over. Sia turned to Ethan, silver eyes burning. "We need to talk." Ethan wiped the blood from his lip. Something in her voice sent a prickle of unease down his spine. And he knew the storm was only just beginning. The night wind howled between the towering spires of Harrova Prime, where neon lights shimmered across vast glass facades, painting a chaotic masterpiece of brilliance and shadow. Ethan and Sia sprinted across a narrow skybridge, the echo of their footsteps lost beneath the hum of the city. Behind them, Shade's enforcers closed in, black-clad figures armed with searing plasma rifles, their crimson eyes scanning through the darkness like relentless predators. "Left," Sia barked, diving forward just as a plasma bulb tore past her ear. Ethan spun, raising his weapon. 2 sharp cracks echoed through the night. His shots punched through an enemy's armor, dropping him instantly, but there was no time to celebrate. More were coming. They dashed up a narrow stairwell, ascending toward the rooftop. As they emerged onto the uppermost platform, Harrova Prime stretched before them, an ocean of lights, skylanes bustling with sleek hovercraft, and towering highways suspended in midair. Sia turned, her silver eyes cold and resolute. "We can't keep running." Ethan exhaled sharply. "Then we fight." Shade's forces swarmed. They came from all directions, silent, efficient, deadly. One dropped down from above, an energy blade slicing through the air toward Ethan. He twisted, dodging just in time. and drove his elbow into the assassin's throat before kicking him back. Sia moved like a phantom. She weaved between enemies, her energy dagger carving swift arcs of light through armor and flesh. A flick of her wrist, a sharp twist, and another opponent crumpled at her feet. But they weren't alone. A mechanical hum filled the air. Above them, a combat drone hovered, its sensors locking onto their movements. A heartbeat later, it unleashed a barrage of plasma rounds. Shit, Ethan dove sideways, barely avoiding the deadly rain of fire. He yanked a grenade from his belt, a compact EMP charge, and hurled it skyward. A crackling blue pulse erupted in the air. The drone sputtered, then spiraled downward before detonating in a fiery burst. Sia seized the opening, closing the distance between herself and the last attacker. She ducked under his wild swing, swept his legs out from beneath him, and drove her blade straight through his chest plate. Silence followed. Their ragged breaths were the only sound left. For a fleeting moment, it seemed over. Then came the slow, grinding sound of shifting metal. Across the rooftop, a massive steel door slid open. From the shadows beyond, a mechanical titan stepped forward, a war mech, towering 3 meters tall, its arms bristling with plasma cannons. Its crimson visor flared, locking onto its targets. Shade had set the trap. "We're not taking that thing head-on," Ethan muttered, taking a cautious step back. Sia's gaze darted around, analyzing their options. Then she saw it, a narrow steel beam spanning the gap between their rooftop and the next building. 10 meters away, we jump. Her voice was steady, decisive. Ethan clenched his jaw. "You're kidding." A deafening whine cut through the air. The mech's plasma cannons charge. The rooftop bathed in a fiery glow. Sia didn't wait. She sprinted forward, leapt off the edge, and twisted mid-air, landing gracefully on the steel beam. Ethan cursed and followed. The instant his boots touched the beam, a plasma blast struck nearby. The entire structure trembled. Ethan's balance faltered. He slipped. The abyss of Harrova Prime yawned below him. Miles of open air before the endless streams of traffic. A fall that promised instant death. Sia's hand shot out. "Hold on," she gritted, her muscles straining as she grasped his wrist. Across the rooftop, the mech adjusted its aim. They were out of time. Pain seared through Ethan's body as consciousness slowly returned. A cold, sterile light hummed above, reflecting off smooth metal walls. His vision swam, a dull ringing in his ears as he tried to move, only to find his wrists locked in place by glowing blue energy restraints. The room around him was unlike any holding cell he had ever seen, pristine, clinical, filled with an unsettling array of scientific equipment. Along the walls, glass cylinders held swirling, bioluminescent liquid, within which grotesque organic samples pulsed and grew. Suspended in eerie stillness, his breath caught. "Sia." He turns his head, finding her strapped to a similar metal chair just a few feet away. Her silver eyes snapped open, widening for the briefest second before narrowing in sharp focus. She didn't scream, didn't panic, just clenched her jaw, already assessing their situation. "Where are we?" she asked, voice taut with control. Ethan scanned the room. No windows, no clear indication they were still on Harrova Prime. "A lab," he muttered, "underground, most likely, and I'm guessing." A metallic hiss cut him off. A reinforced door slid open, and a group of figures entered. Leading them was a tall man clad in a long black coat. His platinum blonde hair slicked back in a calculated precision. His face was unreadable, too smooth, too controlled, like a mask hiding something far more insidious underneath. He came to a stop before them, icy blue eyes dragging over Ethan and Sia as if they were mere specimens under examination. "Fascinating," he murmured, his voice smooth but devoid of warmth. Ethan's gaze locked onto him. "Who the hell are you?" The man tilted his head slightly, as though debating whether they were even worth answering. Then, a slow, calculated smile formed on his lips, one that carried no trace of kindness. "I am Drayden Voss," he said, "lead architect of the Unity Project." Sia's eyes darkened. The Unity Project? Drayden clasped his hands behind his back and began to pace the room. His tone calm, almost instructional. Shade is not merely an intelligence network or an assassination syndicate, as you might believe, he said. We serve a higher purpose, the next step in evolution. He pressed a command on a nearby console. Instantly, a series of holograms flickered to life, casting an eerie glow through the room. Sia stiffened. Rows of artificial wombs lined a sterile chamber, each one containing an unborn child. But these were not ordinary human infants. Some had silver eyes like hers, others bore subtle, unnatural shifts in their physiology, limbs structured for strength, heightened neural pathways, a seamless blend of human and Gravani genetics. A cold shudder ran down Ethan's spine. What the hell are you doing to them? Drayden turned, regarding them with a glint of something close to amusement. We are crafting the future, he said, a species that merges the finest aspects of both civilizations, strength and intellect, seamlessly unified. Then his gaze settled on Sia, his expression sharpening. And you are the missing piece. Sia's breath hitched, her entire body going rigid. Ethan jerked against his restraints, fury burning through him. The hell are you talking about? Drayden didn't acknowledge his outburst. Instead, he brought up another data panel, a genetic profile. Sia's genetic profile, and beside it, a perfect match from the Unity Project. Her pupils constricted. No, that's impossible. Drayden smiled, slow and deliberate. You are not a pureblood Gravani. His eyes gleamed with certainty as he delivered the final blow. You were one of our first experiments. Sia sat frozen in her chair, her heart pounding so hard she could feel it reverberate through her ribcage. Drayden's words still echoed in her mind. She wasn't a pure Gravani. She was part of the Unity Project. No, that's impossible, she murmured, her gaze locked onto the DNA sequence displayed on the screen. Ethan could feel the shock and anger radiating from her, but there was no time to dwell on it. His eyes swept the room, searching for a weakness, an escape. There had to be a way out. You think spewing this bullshit is gonna break us? Ethan snarled, his voice sharp with defiance. Drayden simply chuckled, a glimmer of amusement in his cold, calculating eyes. Oh, don't misunderstand me. I'm not trying to break you. He stepped closer to Sia, leaning in slightly, his voice dropping to a near whisper, low, persuasive, insidious. I want you to accept the truth, to embrace it. You belong with us, Sia. You belong to Shade. Crack. Drayden's head snapped to the side as Sia's boot connected squarely with his jaw, the force of the strike sending him staggering back. Instead of anger, a smirk played at the corner of his lips. Good, he muttered, rubbing his jaw. A strong spirit. Go to hell. Sia spat. Her fingers moved subtly, flipping a tiny switch on her wrist, an emergency override she had activated long before. With a faint bzzzt, the energy cuffs around Ethan's wrists flickered and died. His lips curled into a grin. Now it's my turn. Before Drayden could react, Ethan lunged, his fist smashed into the man's face, sending him sprawling across the floor. Alarms blared, the steel doors burst open, and two guards charged in, weapons raised. But Sia was faster. In a single, fluid motion, she twisted, snatching a pistol from one of the guards' belts and fired a clean shot through his skull. Ethan caught the second guard off balance, wrenching his rifle away before emptying a burst into three more hostiles flooding the hallway. Move, Sia shouted. They tore through the corridor, red warning lights flashing in frantic pulses. Doors slammed shut behind them, as if Shade was trying to box them in. Then, a guttural, inhuman roar echoed from the far end of the passageway. Ethan and Sia skidded to a stop. From the darkness, something emerged, towering nearly 7 feet tall. Its sinewy muscles rippled and shifted as if its body couldn't decide on a stable form. Pale, patchwork flesh stretched over its frame, veins pulsing with an eerie bioluminescence. Black, soulless eyes locked onto them, devoid of any trace of sentience. Sia's grip on her gun tightened. Artificial mutations, she muttered. Behind them, Drayden was back on his feet, wiping a trickle of blood from his lip. That's right, he said, his voice laced with amusement. Early prototypes, failures, some might say, but still, useful. He snapped his fingers. The creature lunged. Ethan shoved Sia aside just as the monstrosity's claws slashed through the air. Embedding deep into the steel wall, he spun, drawing his combat knife in one swift motion, and drove it straight into the creature's neck. The blade barely left a scratch. "You've got to be kidding me," he muttered. Sia rolled to the opposite side, raising her pistol and unloading a burst of plasma rounds into the thing's head. One shot struck its eye, eliciting a deafening screech of pain, but it wasn't enough. It wasn't dying. Not worth the fight. She shouted, "Run!" Ethan didn't argue. Grabbing Sia's wrist, he pulled her into a dead sprint. The creature let out another shriek, but they didn't look back. They crashed through the final door at the end of the hallway and ran straight into a waiting squad of Shade operatives. Gunfire erupted. They fought as they moved, ducking and weaving, every shot taken with precision. One by one, the operatives fell. They were close, so damn close. Then, a single gunshot. Sia gasped, her breath catching in her throat. A sharp pain exploded in her side. She staggered, crimson staining her suit. Ethan whirled around, snapping off 3 shots, 2 to the chest, 1 to the head. The sniper went down instantly. "Sia," he dropped to her side. She clutched the wound, her breathing shallow. "Ethan, don't worry about me, just go." "Not a chance." He crouched down, hauling her onto his back. "I'm not leaving you behind." The facility trembled. Explosions rippled through the underground structure. The self-destruct sequence had been activated. Ethan ran. Behind them, fire roared through the corridors, consuming everything in its path. With one final leap, they burst through the exit, and the lab was swallowed in flames. The cold night air lashed against Ethan's face as he burst out of the collapsing underground facility. Sia lay limp on his back, her breathing weak, but still alive. "Just hold on a little longer. We're almost out of here," he growled, sprinting down the empty road, the sprawling skyline of Harrova Prime stretching before him. Behind them, the final explosion ripped through the lab, consuming the entire complex in a fiery abyss. If they had been even a few seconds slower, they would have been buried beneath the rubble. Ethan dashed into a narrow alleyway, where he had hidden an escape vehicle, a small hoverbike, compact but fast enough to get them far from the danger zone. He gently set Sia down, quickly assessing her wound. Blood seeped through her armor, staining the dark fabric, but the shot hadn't hit anything vital. "Can you keep going?" Ethan asked, still catching his breath. Sia forced her eyes open, her violet irises reflecting something unreadable. She had something to say. He could see it, but she hesitated. "Spit it out," Ethan urged, "before Shade tracks us down again." She exhaled slowly, tilting her head back to stare at the city lights flickering in the sky above. "Ethan," her voice was quiet, almost distant. "I'm not a pureblood Gravani." Ethan froze, a flicker of confusion crossing his face. "What do you mean?" Sia closed her eyes for a moment, as if steeling herself for what she was about to reveal. "I am a part of the unification project." The words hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. "What?" he muttered, but Sia's expression was unwavering, cold, resolute, devoid of deception. "I am the first, and only proof that humans and Gravani can be fused." "No." Ethan shook his head. "That's impossible. Your species and mine have completely different genetic structures. Crossbreeding isn't just unlikely, it's biologically unfeasible." A weak, bitter chuckle escaped Sia's lips. "That's what we all believed." She lifted a hand to her wrist, activating a concealed interface beneath her armor. A holographic display flickered to life, projecting a strand of DNA, unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. A hybrid of human and Gravani genetics, impossibly interwoven. "This is me, Ethan." Ethan stared at the data, his mind racing to process what he was seeing. A genetic structure that shouldn't exist, yet it did. If this was real, then Shade had done the unthinkable. They had shattered the natural laws of evolution and engineered something entirely new. Shade created me, Sia continued. I wasn't born naturally. They experimented dozens, maybe hundreds of times, and I was the only one who survived. My DNA isn't just a hybrid, it was engineered, optimized to bridge the gap between our species. Ethan frowned. You mean they manipulated your genome? Sia nodded. Not just mine, the children we found in the facility, they weren't there by chance. They were the next test subjects, and maybe they were the key to Shade's ultimate goal. What goal? To create a new species, one that combines the strengths of both races while retaining full reproductive capability. Something that, she hesitated, her voice quiet but certain, I might be the first proof of. A cold shiver ran down Ethan's spine. So from the very beginning, they planned to use you. Sia smirked, but there was no humor in it. And when I defected, they began searching for a replacement. But those failed experiments we just fought, none of them survived the process. Silence hung between them, thick and heavy. The distant hum of the city buzzed around them, indifferent to the weight of the truth that had just been spoken. Ethan took a deep breath, forcing himself to focus. Then he looked straight into Sia's eyes. So what now? Sia let out a small, tired laugh. I should run, disappear again. But if I do, Shade will never stop. Ethan nodded slowly. I don't know how the world is going to react to this. But I do know one thing. He extended his hand, his gaze firm. You don't have to face it alone. Sia blinked, surprised for just a moment. Then, slowly, she reached out and took his hand. Ethan fell silent, his gaze drifting to the wound on Sia's side before meeting her brilliant violet eyes. You're not just an experiment, Sia, you are your own person. Sia gave a faint smile. Do you really think so? Ethan didn't answer. Instead, he reached out, his fingers gently brushing against hers. And in that moment, the pain, the fear, the weight of everything they had lost seemed to fade. They both knew this war might not give them another chance. And there, in the ruins of a dying city, between ragged breaths and racing heartbeats, they found solace in each other. Two lost souls drifting in an endless universe. Harrova Prime, Central District. The rain came down in heavy sheets, drumming against the asphalt and painting the streets with shimmering reflections of neon lights. From the rooftop of a towering high-rise, Ethan and Sia watched the headquarters of Shade, a cold, black steel fortress, standing in eerie silence amid the glowing heart of the city. We're really doing this, huh? Sia murmured, eyes locked onto their target. Ethan took a deep breath, checking his weapon, a plasma carbine that had saved his life more times than he could count. We don't have a choice. For a moment, they simply looked at each other. No words were needed, they both understood. This was the endgame. Then, they moved. Inside Shade headquarters, alert triggered, the security doors groaned as they began to seal. But it was already too late. Ethan and Sia had stormed into the command center, cutting down the first wave of guards in mere seconds. Shut down the main power grid, Ethan shouted, firing a burst of plasma rounds that tore through the darkness. Striking a Shade operative mid-charge, Sia sprinted toward the central control panel, fingers flying across the interface. I need 30 seconds, hold them off. 30 seconds, in the middle of a firefight. That might as well have been a lifetime. More Shade operatives poured in from every direction, energy rifles painting streaks of death across the room. Ethan ducked under a volley of gunfire, rolled to the side, and took out two enemies with a well-placed burst. Another attacker lunged at him from behind, but he pivoted, driving the butt of his rifle into the man's skull. The body crumpled instantly. Done, Sia shouted just as the power cut out, plunging the entire facility into darkness. Move, without hesitation. They pushed forward, toward the command chamber, where their final enemy awaited. Shade's high command chamber. So, you finally arrived. The voice echoed through the vast chamber. But the darkness here was more than just the absence of light. It was deeper, heavier, as if the very air carried something sinister. The figure standing before them, Shade's true mastermind, was Valen Droz. He was no longer human, no longer fully Gravani, either. He was something else, the final product of the unification project. You think you can stop evolution? Valen's voice was cold, laced with contempt. We are forging a new future, a superior species, and you are nothing but obstacles in the way. How many innocent lives did you sacrifice to build this future of yours? Sia's fists clenched, her violet eyes burning with fury. Evolution demands sacrifice, Valen replied smoothly, a thin smile curling his lips. And then, he moved. Valen struck like a nightmare, faster than anything Ethan had ever faced. It wasn't just raw power. It was precision. The calculating mind of a human merged with the predatory instincts of a Gravani. Ethan fired a volley of plasma rounds. Valen dodged them effortlessly. Before Ethan could react, a brutal strike sent him flying across the chamber, slamming into a reinforced steel wall. Sia launched herself forward, her movements a blur of lethal grace. She struck with blinding speed, exchanging rapid blows with Valen. But he was stronger, faster, better. A vicious kick sent her crashing to the ground. Blood trickled from the corner of her mouth as she struggled to rise. It's over, Valen said calmly, stepping forward, ready to deliver the final blow. But then, he froze. A blade, cold and sharp, had been driven deep into his back. Ethan, battered and bleeding, stood behind him, his grip firm on the knife. He leaned in, whispering through gritted teeth, "Not yet." Then, he activated the magnetic charge on the explosive device strapped to Valen's chest. "Run," Ethan roared. Sia's eyes widened in horror. She lunged toward him, but it was too late. The blast consumed them both in a searing explosion of light. Ash and light, Sia collapsed to her knees, staring at the smoldering wreckage before her. Her breath came in ragged gasps. Her fingers trembled as she reached forward, searching, hoping, but there was nothing left. Nothing but a single fragment of Ethan's armor, still burning in the aftermath. She clutched it to her chest, her heart tightening, the weight of his sacrifice crashing down upon her like a tidal wave. Ethan was gone. He had given everything to save her. The rain continued to fall, washing away the blood, the ash, but not the pain. Sia slowly lifted her gaze toward the towering skyline of Harrova Prime. Its lights cutting through the endless storm. His story might have ended, but hers wasn't over yet, and this time, she wouldn't run anymore. Central Hospital, Harrova Prime, the sterile scent of antiseptics and the steady beeping of a heart monitor pulled Ethan back to consciousness. He blinked, his vision hazy, overwhelmed by the harsh white glow of overhead lights. A deep, searing pain pulsed through his body, a stark reminder that he was still alive. Alive, the explosion had swallowed him and Valen in a maelstrom of fire and force. He remembered it vividly, the inferno consuming everything, the air ripped from his lungs. He should have died, but somehow, he was here. Ethan tried to move, but a numb stiffness clung to his limbs. A biometric screen beside him displayed his vitals, stable, but barely. Someone had saved him. The door to his hospital room slid open. A nurse entered first, followed by a middle-aged man in the crisp uniform of the Coalition. Colonel Adrian Greaves. "Welcome back, Turner." Ethan forced an eyebrow up, his voice hoarse. "I'm not dead." Greaves let out a faint smirk and pulled up a chair beside the bed. "Not for lack of trying. We found you in the wreckage of Shade's headquarters. The building's blast-resistant framework kept you from being completely incinerated, but it took days to dig you out." Ethan swallowed, his mind struggling to piece together fragments of memory. "And, Sia?" The air in the room grew heavier. Greaves' smirk faded. "She's gone." 4 months later, a remote colony world. The wind whispered across endless fields of violet grass. The sky painted in hues of deep amber as the sun dipped below the horizon. Ethan sat in silence on a stone bench, watching the distant glimmer of transport ships breaking through the planet's upper atmosphere. He had left Harrova Prime behind. No more battles, no more secrets, no more shade, and yet, the emptiness remained. Sia had vanished without a trace. No records, no transmissions, nothing. The Coalition had searched for her, They found nothing. It was as if she had never existed. Ethan had never believed in miracles. But then, it happened. A voice. Ethan. Familiar. Soft. Real. His heart pounded. His fingers trembled as he fumbled to activate his personal communicator. The screen flickered to life. And there, against the grainy backdrop of an encrypted signal, was her face. Sia? He whispered, barely daring to believe. It's me, she said, her voice carrying the weight of 1,000 emotions. Where are you? Somewhere safe. I can't say where, but there's something you need to know. Ethan sensed the hesitation in her voice. What is it? She took a deep breath. I'm pregnant. For a moment, his heart seemed to stop. What? It's our child, Ethan. Her voice was steady, yet laced with uncertainty. It shouldn't be possible, but it happened. It took Ethan several seconds to process her words. But you told me our species couldn't reproduce together. Sia nodded, a contemplative look flickering in her eyes. I thought so too, but maybe my existence proves otherwise. Shade designed my genetic code to merge both species. I was a prototype, and now I'm carrying the next generation. The world seemed to tilt beneath him. A child, theirs, a being unlike any that had ever existed before, one that could be the beginning of something entirely new. What are you going to do now? He asked, his voice still tinged with disbelief. Sia exhaled slowly. I need time. Then, with quiet resolve, she added, but there's one thing I know for sure. This child will be hunted across the galaxy. And I will protect them, no matter what. Ethan clenched his fist. You won't have to do it alone. A faint smile touched Sia's lips just before the screen went dark. Outside the window, the endless night stretched beyond the horizon. A new beginning had taken shape, a future no one could predict.